I took the job because my bank account was at zero, and my truck was making a sound that meant alternator. The kind of sound that starts as a whine and ends with you stranded on the shoulder, with your hazards blinking into nothing. I'd been putting it off for 2 weeks, driving only when I had to, but that window was closing. The posting was on a corkboard at the ranger station in town. Overnight caretaker at Battery Point Lighthouse. Temporary contract. Cash stipend. Meals not included. I figured it was some kind of desperate situation when they hired me after a 10-minute phone interview. Didn't ask for references. Didn't ask about experience. Just asked if I could follow instructions and stay put. That's me. I showed up an hour before dusk with a sleeping bag strapped to my tool tote and a backpack with 3 days of canned soup and instant coffee. The lighthouse sat on a chunk of rock about 100 yards offshore, connected to the parking lot by a narrow causeway of tide-smoothed stones. The whole thing looked temporary. The causeway, I mean. It looked like something the ocean was letting you borrow. I stood there next to my truck and watched the tide line pull back. Slow but steady. The water slid off the rocks and left them dark and slick, covered in kelp that hadn't decided if it was green or brown. There were tide pools in the low spots, little pockets of trapped ocean with nothing moving inside them. The lighthouse itself was squat and white with a red roof. Older than anything else I could see from where I stood. It had that look. The kind that says it's been here longer than you and it'll be here after. I grabbed my gear and started toward the gate. She was already there. Ranger Robin Crane. I recognized her from the brief meeting 2 days earlier when I'd signed the paperwork. Around 5'6", solid build, hair pulled back tight enough to look like it hurt. She wore the uniform, dark green jacket with the park service patch, utility belt, boots that had seen some miles. She didn't smile when I walked up, just nodded once and held out a key card on a retractable clip and a folded piece of paper. "Tide chart," she said. "Memorize it." I took both. The chart was laminated, creased down the middle. High tide was marked in blue, low in red. Tonight's high came in around 8:30. I had maybe 90 minutes before the causeway went under. "You'll want to cross now," she said, already turning toward the rocks. I followed. The causeway wasn't wide, maybe 6 feet across at the most, narrower in places where the stone humped up or dipped into shallow channels. The kelp made everything slippery, and there were pools deep enough to soak your boot if you stepped wrong. Robin moved across it without looking down, her stride even and sure. I picked my way slower, adjusting the tote on my shoulder and keeping my eyes on the next flat spot. The ocean was out past the rocks, pulling itself together for the return trip. I could hear it rolling, that low grinding sound waves make when they're working on stone. Gulls circled overhead, but they weren't calling, just drifting. "Storm's coming in tomorrow night," Robin said without looking back. "Radio forecast says it'll stay offshore, but the surf's going to pick up. Got it? You'll feel it in the building. Don't worry about that." I didn't ask what I should worry about instead. We reached the other side and stepped onto the rock. It was bigger than it looked from shore, maybe half an acre of uneven stone with patches of scraggly grass, an ice plant clinging to the dirt pockets. The lighthouse stood in the center, ringed by a low fence and a brick walkway that had seen better decades. There was a smaller outbuilding to the left, storage probably, and a wooden sign near the door that said, "Battery Point Lighthouse Museum Est, 1856. Robin led me up the walk and unlocked the front door with a key from her belt. The door was heavy, painted red to match the roof, and it swung inward with a creak that sounded older than the hinges. Inside smelled like dust and old wood, and something faintly metallic I couldn't place. The entry room was small, set up like a visitor center with a desk, a donation box made of scratched acrylic, and a wire rack full of brochures about the lighthouse's history. There were photos on the walls, black and white shots of shipwrecks and fog and men in oilskins standing next to enormous lamps. One of the ships looked familiar. I didn't stop to read the plaque. Robin moved past the desk into a narrow hallway. I followed, my boots loud on the floorboards. "Radio's here," she said, pointing to a handset mounted on the wall next to a corkboard covered in weather printouts and maintenance logs. "Channel 16, Park Dispatch monitors it around the clock. You need something, you call. Don't use it unless you need it." I nodded. She kept walking, turned a corner, stopped at a metal panel box bolted to the wall. "Breaker box. Everything's labeled. Lights are on a timer. They'll cut at 10. Don't override it unless there's a reason." "What counts as a reason?" She looked at me then. Her eyes were brown, flat, and calm. "You'll know." That bugged me a little, but I didn't push it. She led me through another doorway into what must have been the keeper's quarters back when someone actually lived here full time. It was small. A cot against one wall, narrow and military-looking with a thin mattress and a folded wool blanket. A wooden chair, a shelf with a few books, spines too faded to read the titles from where I stood. A single window facing east, salt-crusted on the outside with a view of the shoreline and the parking lot beyond the causeway. I dropped my tote next to the cot. "Donation box gets counted and logged once a week," Robin said. "Don't touch it, don't open it. Someone comes by, you tell them the museum's closed and they can come back during posted hours." "What if they don't leave?" "They will." She handed me the key card. "This gets you in and out of the main door in the storage building. Bathroom's through there." She pointed to a door I hadn't noticed, tucked into the corner near the shelf. "Water works, heating works, but it's slow. Stay inside after dark unless it's a true emergency." Define true emergency. Fire, flood, medical. "What about?" "Stay inside," she said again. Clipped, final. I didn't argue. She walked back toward the entry, her footsteps quick and even, and I trailed after her because it seemed like the thing to do. At the front door she stopped, one hand on the frame, and looked past me into the building. Not at me. At the walls, maybe, or the shadows starting to collect in the corners as the light outside went amber and thin. "You follow the rules. This is easy work," she said. "You don't, it's not." "I'll follow them." She nodded once and stepped outside. I stood in the doorway and watched her cross back over the causeway, her pace the same as before, steady and unbothered. The tide was creeping in now, little waves starting to lap at the edges of the rocks, filling in the low spots. By the time she reached the parking lot, the water was ankle-deep in places. She got into her truck, a white Park Service pickup with a light bar on the roof, and drove off without looking back. I stayed in the doorway until the causeway went under. It didn't happen all at once. The ocean just kept coming, patient and methodical, sliding over the stones and erasing the path piece by piece until there was nothing left but water. Dark water, shifting and cold, with foam riding the surface where it broke against the rock. The lighthouse sat in the middle of it now, alone and fixed, and I was alone with it. I went back inside and locked the door. The keeper's room felt smaller than it had 10 minutes ago. I set my backpack on the chair and unrolled my sleeping bag across the cot, then sat down and looked out the window. The parking lot was empty now. Just my truck sitting there under the yellow glow of a single streetlight, looking about as useful as a paperweight. I sat there for a while, not doing much, just listening. The waves hit the foundation every 8 seconds or so, a deep, hollow thud that traveled up through the stone and into the floorboards. Rhythmic, constant. The kind of sound you stop hearing after a while, or think you do, until you realize it's the only thing you've been hearing the whole time. The light outside faded from amber to gray to something closer to purple. I could see the town across the water, a loose scatter of lights climbing the hillside. Crescent City. Population around 6,000, give or take. I'd been there 2 months, working day labor at the docks and sleeping in my truck when the pay didn't stretch to the weekly motel rate. This job meant 3 nights indoors and enough cash to fix the alternator, Maybe enough to buy myself another week of not worrying. Simple on paper. I stood up and walked through the museum just to get a sense of the layout. The hallway branched into 3 rooms. One was full of old maritime equipment. Brass lamps, coils of rope thick as my wrist, a ship's wheel mounted on the wall with a plaque underneath. Another room had display cases with artifacts pulled from local wrecks, corroded tools, pieces of hull, a logbook under glass, the ink faded to nothing. The third room was the tower access, a spiral staircase, iron and narrow, leading up into darkness. I didn't climb it, not yet. Back in the keeper's room, I opened a can of soup and ate it cold with a plastic spoon from my pack. Chicken noodle. Tasted like salt and tin. I washed it down with water from the bathroom tap, metallic, but clean enough, and then sat on the cot again, staring at nothing in particular. The building creaked, settling probably, or the wind picking up. I couldn't tell the difference yet. My phone had 1 bar of signal and 18% battery. I turned it off and tucked it into my pack. Robin hadn't mentioned Wi-Fi, and I wasn't about to ask. The timer cut the lights at 10, just like she'd said. The darkness came on fast and complete, the kind you don't get in town where streetlights bleed through every window. I waited for my eyes to adjust. They did, a little. Shapes emerged. The window frame, the outline of the chair, the faint glow of moonlight on the water outside, scattered and weak. I lay down on the cot and pulled the blanket over me. It smelled like mothballs and mildew. The mattress was about as thick as a folded towel. The waves kept hitting the foundation, steady, unbroken. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but the isolation sat on my chest like a hand. Not panic, nothing that sharp, just the slow, creeping awareness that I was alone on a rock in the middle of the ocean, with no way off until the tide decided to let me go. The whole point of the job, probably. I kept my eyes closed and listened to the water and told myself it was easy money. Robin had her hand on the door when she turned back. Almost forgot. She pulled a laminated sheet from her jacket pocket, unfolded it once. The lamination was that thick kind, probably done in the 90s with one of those big rolling machines. But the paper inside looked way older. Typewritten. Actual typewriter, with the letters punched unevenly and the lowercase e sitting just a hair higher than everything else. "Night shift rules," Robin said. She handed it to me. The title across the top confirmed it. "Night shift rules" in all caps, underlined twice. 5 numbered items below, single-spaced, margins tight. "Read it," Robin said. Twice. I read it. 1. Lock the seaward door by 9:10 p.m. Do not unlock it until 6:10 a.m. 2. If the foghorn sounds 3 times in succession, shut off every interior light and sit on the cot until it stops. 3. Do not climb above the lantern room between 1 a.m. and 1:20 a.m. 4. Ring the brass bell in the tower exactly 7 times at 4:17 a.m. 5. If you find wet footprints on the stairs leading toward the seaward door, mop them immediately. Do not follow them. I read it again, slower the second time, which didn't make it make more sense. "Seaward door?" I asked. Robin pointed past the desk, toward the hallway I'd glanced down earlier. Back of the building, faces the ocean. Used to be the working entrance when this was an active station. Keepers brought supplies in that way during low tide. Why lock it at 9:10 specifically? Because those are the rules. Her tone didn't leave room for follow-up questions, but I tried anyway. The foghorn still works. It's automated. Weather service controls it. Doesn't go off often. She crossed her arms. But if it does, you do what the sheet says. I looked back at the laminated paper. The edges were worn smooth like it had been handled a lot, folded and unfolded, passed from person to person. "What's the brass bell?" "In the tower, halfway up, mounted on the wall, you'll see it. And I ring it at 4:17. "Exactly 4:17, Robin said. "Not 4:15, not 4:20. Set an alarm." I nodded. Didn't ask why, figured she wouldn't tell me anyway. Wet footprints, I said instead. Robin's expression didn't change. If you see them, mop them. There's cleaning supplies in the storage building. Your key card works on that lock too. Don't follow them, I repeated, reading off the sheet. Right. Why would I follow them? You wouldn't, Robin said, because the rule says not to. She wasn't being sarcastic. She said it flat, matter of fact, the way you'd tell someone not to touch a hot stove. I folded the sheet in half along the existing crease and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Okay. A volunteer quit after one night, Robin said. She was watching me now, the way she had during the interview on the phone, measuring something. Last month. Packed up at 2 a.m., called dispatch, waited on the rock in the rain until we could send a boat. What happened? He didn't follow the rules. Which one? Robin didn't answer. She pulled the door open instead. Cold air poured in, salted and damp. Curiosity gets people hurt out here, Easton. You do the job, you follow the instructions, you'll be fine. Got it. Do you? Yeah, I said. And I meant it. I've worked enough jobs to know that when someone gives you a safety sheet, you don't argue. You don't test it. You just do what it says and collect your pay. Robin stepped outside, paused on the threshold. Storm's still coming tomorrow. Could get bumpy. If you need to leave early, call dispatch before the tide cuts you off. I'll be fine. She looked at me one more time. Then she walked across the causeway without looking back. I watched her step carefully over the kelp patches, boots finding the driest stones, moving fast but not rushed. Practiced. When she reached the parking lot, she climbed into the white park service truck and pulled out. Didn't wave, didn't check her mirror. Just drove. I shut the door. Locked it with the deadbolt. The sound echoed in the entry room, loud and final. The building felt different now. Bigger, maybe, or emptier. Hard to say. I pulled the laminated sheet back out of my pocket. Read it a third time, even though Robin had only told me twice. The rules sat there on the page, clear and simple, weird, sure, but not complicated. Joel had already given me his number. 2 days ago, during the walkthrough, he'd shown me how the donation box locked, where the breaker panel was, which floorboards creaked the loudest. At the end, he'd handed me a business card with his cell written on the back in blue pen. Anything feels off, he'd said. You call me. Don't care what time. I'd tucked the card into my wallet. Thought it was overkill at the time. Now I wasn't sure. Joel had been careful with his words. Hadn't mentioned rules or bells or footprints. Just gave me the basics, walked me through the layout and made sure I knew how to work the radio. But he'd also paused at the seaward door for a long time, staring at the hinges like he was thinking about something he wasn't going to say. You lock this one at night, he'd told me. Every night, don't forget. I hadn't asked why then either. I checked my watch. 8:43. The causeway outside was half covered now, water creeping across the stones in dark sheets. I could still see my truck in the lot, parked under the yellow streetlight next to Robin's tire tracks. 27 minutes until 9:10. I walked down the hallway, past the rooms with the maritime equipment and the wreck artifacts. The seaward door was at the end, painted the same red as the front door but older, with brass hardware that had gone green in the corners. The wood was scarred near the bottom, deep grooves worn into the grain, salt damage probably, or something dragged against it. There was a brass deadbolt at eye level, heavy duty, the kind you'd use on a commercial freezer. I tested the handle, locked already. Good. I walked back to the keeper's room, pulled the laminated sheet out again and set it on the chair next to my backpack. Sat on the cot. The springs creaked under my weight, thin and tired. 4:17 a.m. That was going to be rough. I'd have to set my phone alarm, which meant turning it back on and burning battery I didn't have to spare. But Robin had been specific. exactly 4:17. I pulled my phone out, powered it on, waited for it to boot. 1 bar of signal, 17% battery now. It had dropped 1% since I'd turned it off. I set an alarm for 4:15. 2 minutes to wake up, climb the tower, find the bell. That'd be tight, but doable. Then I set another alarm for 9:08, just to be safe. The rules didn't say what happened if you missed the deadlines. Didn't need to. I could feel the weight of them, the way they sat in my pocket, the way Robin had watched me read them. You follow the instructions, you don't test them. I'd worked demo jobs where you didn't question the engineer when he told you which walls were load-bearing. I'd worked fishing boats where you didn't second-guess the captain when he told you to clip in. This felt the same. Different flavor, maybe, but the same shape. Half safety precaution, half superstition. Probably more than half superstition, if I was being honest. But I wasn't going to be the guy who found out the hard way. At 9:08, my alarm buzzed. I stood, grabbed my keycard, and walked back down the hallway. My boots echoed on the wood floor. The building was quiet except for the waves outside, steady and deep, hitting the foundation every 8 seconds. I reached the seaward door at 9:09, pulled the laminated sheet from my pocket one more time, checked the first rule, locked the seaward door by 9:10 p.m. I gripped the brass deadbolt and turned it. The bolt slid home with a solid click, metal on metal, smooth and certain. Then I checked it, pulled the handle to make sure it held. It held. I checked it again anyway, pulled harder, still locked. 9:10 exactly, according to my watch. I couldn't afford to be wrong. I was sitting on the cot at around 10:30, staring at my watch and doing math I didn't need to do. 4:17 minus 10:30. 5 hours and 47 minutes until I had to climb the tower and ring that bell. I could sleep maybe 4 hours if I set the alarm for 4:10 and moved fast. That's when I heard it. A rattle from the back of the building, single shake of a door handle. Metallic, deliberate, then nothing. I sat there not moving. The sound came from the direction of the seaward door. I knew that before I even thought about it. Same hallway I'd walked down earlier. Same red door with the brass deadbolt I'd tested myself and found already locked. The building went completely still after that. No more rattling, just waves hitting the foundation every 8 seconds and the creak of old wood settling. I waited maybe 30 seconds, listened hard. Nothing. Probably the wind, I figured. Storm wasn't supposed to hit until tomorrow night, but weather moved around out here. Could have been a gust catching the door frame wrong. Then the foghorn went off. 3 blasts, low and deep, each one about 4 seconds long with a gap between. The sound came from outside, but it felt like it was coming through the walls, vibrating in my chest. Old mechanical bellow. The kind that probably ran on compressed air back when this place was active. I stood up. My first thought was the breakers. Maybe something tripped. Maybe the timer system had the horn wired in and I needed to reset it. I had my hand on the door frame, 1 foot in the hallway, when I remembered. The rules sheet, still sitting on the chair next to my backpack where I'd left it. If the foghorn sounds 3 times in succession, shut off every interior light and sit on the cot until it stops. I stopped moving. Stood there in the doorway with my heart doing something unpleasant in my throat. The horn went quiet. Building ticked and settled. Waves kept hitting. I'd checked the weather app maybe an hour ago when I still had signal. Clear skies. No fog rolling in. Temperature steady at 48 degrees. And Robin had said the foghorn was automated, controlled by the weather service. But it wasn't supposed to run anymore. That's what Joel told me 2 days ago when he showed me around. Decommissioned in 2004, replaced by a buoy system offshore. But I just heard it. 3 times. I turned around, went back to the chair, and picked up the laminated sheet. Read Rule 2 again, even though I already knew what it said. My hands weren't shaking. That was good. But my brain was doing loops. trying to figure out if I'd miscounted the blasts or if the weather service kicked it on remotely for some reason or if... Didn't matter. The rule said shut off every interior light and sit on the cot. I walked out to the entry room. The overhead lights were still on, buzzing faintly. I found the switch by the door and flipped it. Room went dark except for the faint glow coming from the parking lot, streetlight filtering through the front window. I moved down the hallway, hit the switch for the maritime equipment room, then the wreck artifacts room. Checked the bathroom even though I was pretty sure that light was already off. The building felt different in the dark, bigger, the ceiling higher than it should have been. I went back to the keeper's room and sat down on the cot. Springs creaked under me. I set the rules sheet on my knee and kept my hands flat on the mattress. Then I waited. The foghorn didn't go off again. I counted 60 seconds in my head, then another 60. Waves kept their rhythm. Foundation kept taking hits. My watch ticked near my ear when I held still enough. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The air started to smell different. Sharp. Salty in a way that made my nose itch. Not the general ocean smell that had been there all night. This was stronger. Specific. Reminded me of the fish market back in Brookings where I'd worked a weekend last year unloading crates. That heavy brine and gut smell when you opened a cooler that had been sitting in the sun. But I was inside a closed building on a rock in the middle of the ocean at 10:40 at night. I didn't move. Kept sitting. Kept my eyes on the dark window frame and my hands on the cot. The smell got worse for maybe 30 seconds, thick enough I could almost taste it. Then it faded. Didn't disappear exactly. Just pulled back to something I could ignore if I tried. I checked my watch. 10:53. The foghorn stayed quiet. The building stayed dark. I figured that was it. Rule followed. Done. I sat there another 10 minutes just to be sure, then got up and turned the lights back on. Entry room first, then the hallway. Everything looked the same. Donation box on the desk, brochures in the wire rack. Shipwreck photos on the wall staring at nothing. I went back to the keeper's room and drank some water from my bottle. Sat on the cot. Tried to think about normal things. My truck alternator. Whether I'd have enough after this week to get it replaced or if I'd need to nurse it another month. The guy at the dock who owed me $40 for helping him move crab pots. Didn't really work. By 12:30 I was too wired to sit still. The building had gone quiet again. Properly quiet. Just the waves and the wind outside and the occasional groan from the floorboards. I grabbed my flashlight from the tool tote, black maglite with a dent near the lens from when I dropped it off a ladder 2 years back, and decided to do a walkthrough. Not because I thought something was wrong, just to stay focused, give myself something to do that wasn't sitting on a cot staring at a wall. I started in the entry room, checked the donation box, still locked. Acrylic top still scratched in the same places. Couple of dollar bills and some change inside, same as before. Moved to the maritime equipment room. Brass lamps on the shelves, thick coils of rope hanging on pegs. Ship's wheel mounted on the wall with a plaque underneath that said SS Northland, 1927. Everything exactly where it had been 3 hours ago. Wreck artifacts room next. Display cases with corroded tools behind glass. Chunks of hull wood. Faded logbook in its own case, open to a page dated March 1879. I'd read the entry earlier. Something about weather turning and visibility dropping. Handwriting tight and slanted. Nothing had moved. Nothing had changed. I was telling myself this was fine. The rules were probably just liability stuff. Protection from drunk idiots who tried to swim out here on a dare, or trespassers who thought an old lighthouse was a fun place to camp. Park Service covering their ass with weird instructions so if something happened they could say they warned you. Made sense. Kind of. I walked back toward the keeper's room, swinging the flashlight beam across the floor out of habit more than anything. That's when I saw them. Wet footprints on the stairs. I stopped walking, stood there in the hallway with the flashlight aimed at the base of the iron spiral staircase that led up into the tower. The prints were bare feet, narrow, maybe a woman's size 7 or 8, stamped into the wood in clean dark outlines, water pooling slightly in the deepest parts. They started at the bottom step and went up. 4 prints visible from where I stood, maybe more higher up where the stairs curved out of sight. I'd walked past this spot maybe 10 minutes ago on my way to check the artifacts room. There'd been nothing on those stairs. I was sure of it. I'd shined the flashlight right across them. Now there were wet footprints going up. I didn't move, kept the beam on the stairs and tried to think. The prints looked fresh. Water hadn't dried yet. Edges still sharp and clean, not blurred or spread out. Somebody walked up those stairs recently. While I was doing my rounds, I thought about the seaward door, the rattle I'd heard at 10:30, the deadbolt I'd tested earlier and found locked. Then I thought about Rule 5. If wet footprints are found on stairs leading toward the seaward door, mop them immediately and do not follow them. I read it wrong before. I'd assumed it meant footprints going down toward the seaward door, like someone leaving. But the rule didn't say that. It just said footprints on stairs leading toward the seaward door. These prints were going up, into the tower, away from where I stood. I kept the flashlight steady and didn't move my feet. Rule 5 said not to follow them. I stood there for probably 30 seconds just staring at those wet footprints going up the iron staircase, my flashlight beam steady on the bottom step. The prints were clear, too clear, like someone had just walked out of the ocean and straight up those stairs without stopping to drip or hesitate. I forced myself to turn around and walk back to the storage building. The keycard worked on the exterior door, a metal shed about 10 feet from the lighthouse's north side that I'd barely noticed earlier. Inside smelled like mildew and WD-40. I found the cleaning supplies on a wire shelf, yellow mop bucket with a wringer, wooden-handled mop that looked older than me, half-empty bottle of something labeled multi-surface cleaner in faded letters, and a stack of gray rags that might have been white once. I filled the bucket in the bathroom sink. The water came out cold and metallic tasting, same as before. I added 2 capfuls of cleaner even though I wasn't sure it mattered. The mop head was ratty but clean enough. Then I wheeled the bucket to the base of the spiral staircase and started pushing water across the steps. The footprints didn't disappear right away. I had to go over each one twice, sometimes 3 times, watching the dark outlines lighten and blur before finally fading into damp wood. My hands were steady on the mop handle. That surprised me a little. I figured they'd shake, but they didn't. The prints went up methodically, not rushed, not hesitant either, just steady, like someone who knew exactly where they were going and didn't need to think about it. Each step placed deliberately in the center of the iron tread, spaced evenly apart. I counted them as I mopped. 14 prints total. They ended at the first landing. I mopped my way up, wringing the mop head every few steps, watching dirty water swirl back into the bucket. The stairs were narrow. My shoulders nearly touched both sides. I kept the flashlight wedged under my arm, the beam bouncing with each movement. When I reached the landing, I stopped. The last footprint sat directly under a frame photograph hanging on the wall. Black and white, maybe 8 by 10, behind glass that needed cleaning. The photo showed a Coast Guard crew, 9 men in uniform standing in 2 rows in front of this lighthouse. The ones in back stood straight with their hands behind their backs. The ones in front knelt on one knee. All of them looked serious. Nobody smiled in old photos like that. A small brass plaque at the bottom of the frame read, "Station Crew, 1964. I'd seen the photo during Joel's walkthrough 2 days ago. Hadn't paid much attention to it then. Now, in my flashlight beam, the surface looked wrong. The glass was fogged on the inside, which didn't make sense because the frame was sealed. But it wasn't just fog. The paper inside looked wet. Not like condensation on the glass. The actual photograph looked damp, like it was sweating from the inside out. The faces of the 9 men had this blurred quality at the edges, their uniforms bleeding slightly into the background. I mopped the last footprint and stepped back. The wood was damp but clean. No more dark outlines. No more pooling water. Just wet floorboards that would dry in an hour or two. I dragged the bucket back downstairs, dumped the dirty water in the bathroom sink, and watched it swirl down the drain. Rinsed the mop head, wheeled everything back to the storage shed, and locked it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. 13% battery. 1 bar of signal. A text from Joel's number, timestamp 1:02 a.m. Foghorn shouldn't have been possible. Compressor's been dead since '04. If you hear scraping from the lantern, stay downstairs. I read it twice. Then I typed back, "Why sent?" I stood in the keeper's room with my phone in my hand, watching the screen. The little dots appeared that meant he was typing. Then they disappeared. Then they came back. Then they disappeared again. Nothing came through. I waited 3 minutes, then 5. No response. I checked the time. 1:06 a.m. My alarm was set for 4:10 to give me time to get to the brass bell by 4:17. That left 3 hours. I sat on the cot and put the phone on the chair next to the laminated rules sheet, screen up in case Joel texted back. He didn't. At 1:12, I gave up on sitting still and decided to do another round. I grabbed the flashlight and started with the seaward door, walked down the hallway past the maritime equipment room, past the wreck artifacts, all the way to the end. The red door with the brass hardware and the heavy deadbolt. I tested the handle, still locked. The metal was cold under my palm. I checked the bottom edge where the grooves were worn deep into the wood grain. No water, no sand, no seaweed tracked in from outside. I walked back to the entry room and checked the donation box. Same scratched acrylic top, same bills and change inside. I could see a 5, a couple 1s, and maybe $3 in quarters through the cloudy plastic. The box sat on the desk exactly where it had been all night. Then I moved to the window facing the parking lot and the tide flats. My truck was still out there under the yellow streetlight. The causeway was completely submerged, just dark water shifting in flat sheets with foam on the surface. The tide had to be near its peak. I checked my watch. 12:58 a.m. According to the laminated chart Robin had given me. High tide was at 12:30, so the water should start pulling back soon. Not that it mattered. Wouldn't be passable for hours. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and looked south toward Crescent City. The lights were faint across the water. Maybe 6,000 people over there sleeping in actual beds with actual heat and doors that locked from the inside against normal things. Behind me, the park radio clicked on. Not loud. Just a soft mechanical click, like someone had pressed the talk button. I turned around. The radio was mounted on the wall next to the breaker box. A black handset in a plastic cradle with a coiled cord and a small speaker grill. The power light was green. It had been green all night. But now there was a second light, red next to the word transmit. Static hissed from the speaker, soft, barely audible over the waves hitting the foundation every 8 seconds. Then a voice came through, thin, distant, like it was traveling from very far away or through something that distorted it. Keeper Bates? It used my last name. I stood there with the flashlight in my hand, beam pointing at the floor, not moving. The voice came again. Keeper Bates, do you copy? It wasn't Robin's voice, wasn't Joel's either. It sounded wrong, flat in places, stretched in others, like a recording played at slightly the wrong speed. I hadn't touched the radio, hadn't called dispatch, hadn't pressed any buttons. The red transmit light stayed on. I'd only given my last name to Robin. During the phone interview and again when I signed the paperwork 2 days ago, Joel had my number, but I'd introduced myself as Easton. Just Easton. The static hissed for another 10 seconds. Then the red light went off and the radio clicked again. The same soft mechanical sound, and went silent. I stayed where I was, watching the green power light glow steady on the wall, listening to the waves hit the foundation and the wood creak and my own breathing in the empty room. I reached toward the radio. My hand was maybe 6 inches from the handset when the voice came back. Standing by the west wall, 3 feet from the breaker box, flashlight in your left hand pointing down. I froze. The voice was still flat and stretched wrong, but the words were clear, specific. I was standing by the west wall. The breaker box was to my right. The flashlight was in my left hand, beam on the floor. Facing the window now. Truck's still there. Yellow light. You're wondering if you should leave. I wasn't wondering that. Not out loud. Not where anyone could hear. The red transmit light stayed on. Static hissed underneath the voice. Turn around, Keeper Bates. I didn't turn around. The voice waited. 5 seconds. 10. Then it said, "That's fine. Stay still." I grabbed the radio and switched it off. Twisted the dial all the way counterclockwise until it clicked. The green power light went dark. The static kept going. Same soft hiss from the speaker grill. Same volume. The red transmit light was off now, but the sound didn't stop. It just kept coming, steady and thin, like the circuit stayed open even with no power running through it. I pulled the handset out of the cradle. Didn't help. I checked the back of the unit for a battery compartment. Nothing. The thing was hardwired into the wall, and I'd turned it off, and it was still making noise. I backed away from it. Put the desk between me and the radio. The hissing followed, not louder or softer, just there. My watch said 1:02. I looked at the iron staircase across the room. The footprints were gone. I'd mopped them all. The stairs were dry now, just old iron treads spiraling up into the dark tower. I started walking toward them. Didn't plan it. My legs just moved. I got to the base and put one hand on the railing. Cold metal. Flakes of rust under my palm. I put one foot on the first step. Then I stopped. The rule. Rule 3. Do not climb above the lantern room between 1:00 and 1:20. It was 1:02. I was inside the window. 18 minutes left. I pulled my foot back and stepped away from the stairs. That's when I heard it. Tapping, slow and deliberate. Fingernails on glass, maybe, coming from up in the tower. Not the base or the middle, higher. Lantern level. Tap, tap, tap. 3 taps, then silence, then 3 more. I tilted my head back and looked up the spiral. Couldn't see anything past the first landing, just darkness and the faint outline of iron steps. The tapping stopped, then it turned into a scrape. Long and dragging, metal on metal or something harder. It started on one side of the lantern room, I could tell from the way the sound moved, then dragged across to the other side. Slow, steady, like something heavy pacing the perimeter. It reached the far side and kept going, circling. A full loop around the lantern room in maybe 15 seconds, then starting again. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Something was up there, moving in a pattern, searching for a way down. I backed toward the keeper's room. Didn't run, just moved carefully, keeping my eyes on the staircase, watching for movement. The scraping kept going, steady rhythm, not stopping. I got to the keeper's room and grabbed my phone off the chair. 13% battery, 1 bar. I pulled up Robin's number from the paperwork she'd given me 2 days ago and hit call. It rang 4 times, then voicemail. Her voice, clipped and professional. "You've reached Ranger Crane. Leave a message." I hung up and tried Joel. Same thing. 4 rings. Voicemail. His voice slower and more casual. "This is Joel. I'll call you back." I hung up again. The scraping upstairs was still going, hadn't paused once. I dialed 911. The call connected. I heard the line open, that soft click when someone picks up on the other end. Then it dropped. Just cut out. Not like I lost signal. Like someone hit a button and ended it on purpose. I tried again. Same thing. Connected for half a second, then dead air. I checked the signal bar. Still one bar. Still there. I put the phone down on the chair and sat on the cot. The springs creaked under me. My hands weren't shaking, but they felt cold. The scraping kept going for another 8 minutes. I counted the loops. 18 full circuits around the lantern room, each one taking about 15 seconds, each one sounding exactly the same. Then at 1:20, it stopped, just like that. Mid-scrape. The sound cut off clean, no fade, no trailing echo. I waited. Silence, waves hitting the foundation every 8 seconds, wood creaking, my own breathing. I checked my watch, 1:20 exactly. The air started to warm up, not a lot, just enough to notice. The cold edge that had been sitting in the room since the foghorn went off, it pulled back, faded. I stood up and walked to the doorway. Looked out into the entry room. The radio was still off. The green light was still dark. The static had stopped at some point. I wasn't sure when. Everything looked normal. Donation box on the desk, brochures in the rack, shipwreck photos on the wall. I went to the bathroom and splashed water on my face. The tap was still metallic but cold and clean. I drank some from my cupped hand. When I came back out, the building felt different again, quieter, emptier. The pressure that had been sitting on my chest since the foghorn, it was gone. I thought maybe that was it. Maybe I'd made it through the worst part. I pulled out my camp stove from the tool tote and set it up on the floor near the chair. Instant coffee in my pack, bottled water. I heated the water in my dented tin mug, stirred in 2 spoonfuls of the cheap crystals, and sat on the cot with the mug in both hands. The warmth helped. The smell helped more. Normal things. I pulled the laminated rules sheet off the chair and read it again. 5th time tonight, maybe 6th. Lock the seaward door by 9:10. Don't unlock until 6:10. If the foghorn sounds 3 times, turn off the lights and sit on the cot. Don't climb above the lantern room between 1 and 1:20. Ring the brass bell at 4:17 exactly. If there are wet footprints, mop them and don't follow. I'd done all of it so far. Locked the door early. Turned off the lights when the foghorn went. Stayed off the stairs during the window. Mopped the prints. I stared at the rules for a long time. My coffee got lukewarm. The rules weren't random. They weren't liability protection or paranoia. They kept me away from certain places at certain times. The seaward door locked all night. The stairs off limits during a 20-minute window. The lights off when the foghorn sounded, so nothing outside could see in. They kept me from showing light outward, from opening the building to the sea, from going where something else might be. I folded the sheet along its crease and set it back on the chair. My watch said 2:10. 2 hours and 7 minutes until I had to climb the tower and ring the bell. I finished the coffee. It tasted like aluminum and bitterness, but it was warm. And it was mine. And it was real. At 3:40, the foghorn sounded once. I sat up on the cot, hands flat on the thin mattress, counting. The first blast lasted 4 seconds. Same deep mechanical bellow that vibrated through the walls and made my ribs feel hollow. I waited. 8 seconds later, it sounded again. I grabbed the flashlight off the chair and stood. My watch read 3:40 exactly. I walked to the doorway of the keeper's room and looked into the entry room. The donation box sat on the desk. The brochures were still in the wire rack. Shipwreck photos on the wall. Everything looked normal except I was standing there waiting for a third blast from a foghorn that hadn't worked since 2004. 30 seconds passed. A minute. The waves kept hitting the foundation every 8 seconds. Wood creaked. I stayed in the doorway with the flashlight beam pointed at the floor, waiting. The third blast never came. Instead, I heard a soft knock at the seaward door. Not pounding, not urgent, just 3 polite taps, the kind you'd use at a neighbor's house when you didn't want to wake anyone up. Then, a woman's voice, muffled through the door but clear enough to understand. "Hello? Is someone there?" I didn't move. "Please," the voice said. "I need help. The tide's rising and I can't find the bridge back." I took 2 steps down the hallway before I caught myself. My hand was already reaching for the keycard clipped to my belt. The voice sounded young, scared but trying to stay calm. The kind of voice that made you want to open the door and figure out the rest later. I stopped walking. "I'm lost," the voice continued. "I was walking on the rocks and the water came up so fast. I saw the light and I thought, please, I just need to get back to shore." I looked at my watch, 3:42. High tide had been at 12:30, which meant the causeway was still submerged and wouldn't be passable for hours. Nobody could have walked out here. Nobody could be standing at that door. "My name's Sarah Kern," the voice said. "I'm 17. I live in Crescent City, please." I felt my stomach drop. Sarah Kern. I'd seen that name 2 days ago during Joel's walkthrough. One of the plaques in the wreck artifacts room. A brass plate under a corroded life ring. SS Marianne, capsized April 9th, 1981. 3 crew lost. David Marianne, Captain, 43. Sarah Kern, deckhand, 17. Michael Oates, engineer, 29. I remembered the date because 1981 was the year my mother was born. I'd done the math standing there looking at the plaque, thinking about how my mom would have been a newborn when this girl drowned half a mile offshore. "Please," the voice said again. "It's so cold." I backed up 3 steps. My hands weren't shaking, but they felt numb, like I'd been holding them in ice water. "I know you're there," the voice said. Quieter now. Almost a whisper. "I can hear you breathing." I turned and walked back to the keeper's room. I grabbed my phone off the chair, 11% battery, 1 bar signal. I pulled up the contact list and scrolled to the number I'd saved 2 days ago. Coast Guard Station, Crescent City. Joel had written it on the back of his business card along with his cell. Told me it was there if I ever needed real help, the kind dispatch couldn't handle. I pressed call. The line rang once, then a recorded message. "You have reached Coast Guard Station, Crescent City. Our office hours are 0800 to 1600 Monday through." I hung up and tried 911 again. Same result as before. The call connected for half a second, clicked, then dropped to dead air. "You're not going to call anyone." The voice from the seaward door wasn't muffled anymore. It sounded closer, sharper. "You're going to open this door, Easton." I hadn't told that voice my name. "You're 29, it continued. "You've been in Crescent City 2 months. You worked the docks before this. You sleep in your truck because the alternator's dying, and you can't afford to fix it and pay for a room. Your mother's name is Elizabeth. She lives in Eureka. You haven't called her in 3 weeks because you don't want her to know you're broke again." I stood in the middle of the keeper's room holding my phone, staring at the doorway. "You're scared," the voice said. "But you're more scared of being the guy who quit after one night. You're more scared of going back to nothing." The air smelled like brine again, thick and sharp, the same fish market smell from earlier. "I'm coming in another way," the voice said. No anger in it, just factual. "You should have opened the door when I was polite." Then silence. I waited 30 seconds, a minute. The smell faded but didn't disappear completely. I walked to the hallway, moving slow, flashlight beams sweeping the floor ahead of me. Wet footprints on the iron spiral staircase. Same as before. Bare feet, narrow, size 7 or 8. But this time they started at the upper landing and came down. 4 prints visible from where I stood, descending toward me, water pooling in the deepest parts. I went back to the storage shed. The keycard worked. I grabbed the yellow bucket, mop, and cleaner, filled the bucket in the bathroom sink, wheeled it to the base of the stairs. I started mopping the lowest print. It took 3 passes to fade it into damp wood. I moved to the second print, dunked the mop, wrung it out, wiped. When I looked up, there was another print 2 steps higher than before. I stared at it. I hadn't heard anything. No footsteps, no dripping, no movement. Just a new print where there hadn't been one 10 seconds ago. I mopped it. When I finished and looked up, 2 more prints had formed further up the stairs. I kept mopping. Every time I cleared one, another appeared higher up, like they were leading me, guiding me toward the tower. I made it to the landing, my hands tight on the mop handle, and cleared the last print I could see. The tapping started above. Not slow this time, fast and frantic, coming from the lantern room. Multiple points of contact. It sounded like more than one set of hands, maybe 3 or 4, all tapping at once, moving around the glass in overlapping rhythms that made it hard to count. I backed down the stairs with the mop still in my hand, nearly tripping on the bottom step. I shoved the bucket back toward the bathroom and left it there, mop leaning against the wall. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. 10% battery. The screen showed an incoming call, Ranger Robin Crane. I answered. Robin? Breathing on the other end, slow and steady. Then her voice, calm and measured, the same tone she'd used during the briefing. Easton, you're doing well. What's happening? You need to unlock the seaward door, she said. Simple, matter of fact. It's part of the process. You'll understand once you do it. I looked at my watch. 4:16. Trust me, Robin's voice continued. This is what the job requires. Open the door and everything will make sense. 4:16. The brass bell, rule 4. Ring it at 4:17 exactly. Easton, Robin's voice again. Patient. Are you there? I ended the call. I ran to the spiral staircase and started climbing. The iron steps rang under my boots, loud in the quiet building. The tapping above got faster, more frantic, like it knew what I was doing. I reached the first landing, then the second, my breath coming hard. Halfway up, I saw it. A brass bell mounted on the wall about the size of a dinner plate with a rope hanging from the clapper. I grabbed the rope and checked my watch. 4:16 and 50 seconds. I counted. 55, 58, 59, 4:17. I pulled the rope. The bell rang clear and bright, echoing up into the tower and down into the rooms below. I counted to 3 and rang it again, then again, 4 times, 5, 6. On the 7th ring, the building shuddered, not like the waves hitting the foundation. This was deeper, a full-body tremor that went through the walls and floor and made the bell swing on its mount. The wet footprints on the stairs below me stopped forming. I could see the last one halfway down, and it just sat there, not spreading, not multiplying. The sound at the seaward door, the knocking, the voice, the pressure I hadn't realized was there, collapsed into a long hiss like air escaping a tire, then cut off completely. The tapping above went silent mid-tap. I stood on the landing, holding the bell rope, my hand cramping, listening to nothing but waves and my own heartbeat. The radio clicked on downstairs. I walked down carefully, my legs shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. When I reached the entry room, the radio was live, green light on, red transmit light flickering. Static hissed from the speaker. Then Joel's voice came through in broken bursts. Ton, if you're... Copy. I'm here, I said, grabbing the handset. Bell. You rang it. Good. His voice cut in and out, but I could hear relief under the distortion. That's cycle. Resets. What cycle? The static cleared for a moment and Joel's voice came through clean. The Lighthouse used to guide ships. Brought them in safe when the fog was thick and the rocks were close. That's what it was built for. A pause. But if you open it the wrong way, it can guide other things. Things that shouldn't come in. The static swallowed the rest. I waited until 6:10 to unlock the seaward door. Dawn had started maybe 20 minutes earlier. Gray light creeping through the windows and turning the entry room from black to dim blue. I walked down the hallway with the keycard in my hand, past the maritime equipment room and the wreck artifacts, and stopped at the red door with the brass hardware. The deadbolt slid back smooth and cold. I turned the handle and pulled. The threshold was dry. No footprints, no wet sand, no seaweed. Just old wood worn smooth in the center from decades of use. There was a faint white line along the outside edge of the door frame, crusty and thin. Salt, maybe. Or something else. It looked like a boundary that had held. I stepped outside. The rock was empty. The ocean stretched out flat and gray under the early light. Gulls circled offshore. The air smelled normal, cold and clean, just seawater and stone. I went back inside, locked the door, and packed my gear. Sleeping bag rolled tight, camp stove and tin mug back in the tool tote, phone and charger in my jacket pocket. I folded the laminated rules sheet along its crease and left it on the desk next to the donation box. The causeway was passable by 6:40. I crossed it slow, boots crunching on barnacles and kelp, the stones slick but stable. My truck sat in the parking lot under the yellow streetlight, right where I'd left it. Robin was waiting at the visitor center. She leaned against the white Park Service pickup, arms crossed, watching me walk up. She didn't look surprised or worried. She looked like someone waiting for a report. "You made it," she said. "Yeah." "Follow the rules?" "All of them." She nodded. "Good. That's what I needed to know." I set my gear down next to my truck. "What was that?" "A test," Robin said. "Simple. Final. You passed." "That's it? A test?" "People quit," she said. "Or they don't follow instructions, or they get curious and go looking for answers in the wrong places. That gets them hurt. You didn't do any of that." I stared at her. Someone should know what's happening out there. "Someone does," Robin said. "Me, Joel, a couple of others, and now you, enough to do the job right." She straightened and pulled her keys from her belt. "You want to quit? That's fine. I'll find someone else. But they might not be as careful as you. They might not follow the rules." I thought about that. About the voice at the door, the footprints, the tapping. About someone else standing in that keeper's room at 4:16, phone in hand, not knowing what the bell was for. "I'm staying," I said. Robin studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Next shift starts tomorrow night. Same time." She climbed into the truck and drove off without another word. I stood in the parking lot watching the lighthouse across the water. The red roof, the white tower, the glass lantern room at the top catching the early sun. It looked normal, postcard pretty, the kind of place tourists took pictures of. But I knew it would try again. The alternator could wait. The bell couldn't.